Okay, we're about ready to start, so let me just do a little bit of kind of introduction. So here's Paul, and his on my screen on the right would be Dispelling Watico, which I just recently read, which is his first book, which is very captivating. And then he has a new book, what you can see on the left, that we're going to be talking about this morning in more detail. Again, I'm going to introduce him more formally in a minute. So the music that you're going to be hearing this morning during the intermission is from Jeff Olmsted. Jeff was the music director of the church that I had in New York City throughout the 1990s, and he produced a thing called A Course in Miracles, which is really, really quite beautiful. I want you to know that 10% of whatever comes in today for all of our programs is given to Feed America. Especially during this trying time with COVID, it seems important that we support that. There he is. Hi, Paul.
Hey, John. It's great to see you.
It's wonderful having you with me. I don't know how it was that Dispelling Watico somehow or another showed up on my bookshelf. I was sent it by someone or something, I don't know, but I'm really glad that I got it. And I've been reading it this past week. Past 2 or 3 weeks actually, and actually fascinated by what's the content that's there. Also thought it was fascinating to know for our Course in Miracles folks that Paul worked with Ken Wapnick back during the 1980s in a therapeutic context, and I'd like to hear a little bit about that sharing. If you want to share that with us, it's up to you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, my process really ignited in 1981. And without going into the whole story, there was this incredible trauma that happened with my father, just that he, like all of us, had his unhealed unconscious stuff and enacted his unhealed abuse onto me, being I was the only child, and it created enormous suffering for me. So profound was the suffering that it stopped me. I went from a highly accomplished kid, I was in my early to mid 20s, to not being able to live my life. I mean, the suffering really stopped me in my tracks. So I went inwards for a couple of years, really deeply, had this life transforming spiritual awakening within 24 hours of which I got thrown in a mental hospital and told, oh, you're mentally ill. And I knew it couldn't have been more obvious that I was having a spiritual awakening. And, I'm not going to go into the story, but the next couple of years, maybe 3-4 other times, I was just a free agent out in the world. I would get thrown in these mental hospitals and told, oh, you have this newly discovered chemical imbalance. And, you have this manic depression. You'll have it for the rest of your life. You'll need to be on medication the rest of your life. And meanwhile, my experience was I was realizing, oh my God, this is a dream. We're having a collectively shared dream. And I wasn't speaking in this symbolic, in this like some sort of metaphor. No, I was literally having the experience that we're all collectively dreaming up this universe together. And I was so, excited. And that's what really freaked people out. So then I get out of the last hospital, 82. And I connect with these group of friends, and most of them are students of this thing called A Course in Miracles. So I'm first beginning to study it. And then one of my closest friends, he knew Ken Wapnick, and Ken was in the area. He lived in like the next town from me. So I got in touch with him, and he was a psychologist, a therapist. So I would just go and see him as often as I could. And we're talking, this is probably 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, something right around those years. And every session, so I told him what my personal issue and process with my father and all that, but the whole sessions, every session, I was just picking his brain about the Course in Miracles. And so that was really, that deepened my appreciation, we could say, with reference to what the Course was,
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, that's when he was in Ardsley, and I was in Katona at the time, so not too far away, and
Right.
also visited him there. So, but let's go back now to Watico
Right.
and let's talk about, first of all, for those folks who are with us, we got, I see 62 folks with us. For those who may not know what Watico is, let's explain that. But also, in addition to explaining it, why did you write this book?
Yeah, for sure. So the what like the whole Watico idea, it's a Native American concept, and it connotes really this cannibalistic spirit. It's like this evil spirit. And I was having this direct encounter with something evil, through the abuse with my father, but then through the psychiatric system. And I began to recognize, wow, the same evil force that had come through the instrument of my father was now coming through this system of psychiatry. And then I began to realize, oh my God, it's actually pervading the collective unconscious of our species, that it pervades the non-local field of the whole universe. And so it almost killed me. I mean, and keep in mind, it totally destroyed my family. I haven't
Yeah.
had a family for like 20 something years. But meanwhile, I was like tracking this, whatever this was, and creating maps and trying to understand it. And then I began to realize, oh my God, this is something that's in all of us in potential. It exists in the collective unconscious. And the thing which really surprised me when I wrote Dispelling Watico, and that was almost 10 years ago. I kept on getting emails, consistently over the years asking me, have you read The Course in Miracles?
Mhm.
And so I was articulating, just as a modern person, I was articulating this Native American idea of like this virus of the mind, this parasite of the mind, this cancer of the psyche. There's a lot of different ways of describing it. And as I'm describing it, people who were students of the course were like, oh my God, this is exactly what the Course in Miracles is pointing at, you know?
So can we say that the Watico is an ego, or ego's Watico, or is, let's just clarify that.
Yeah. So my understanding is from all of my friends who are students of the course, they all point, and if they're, studying my work on Watico, they'll point out, well, this is what the course calls ego.
Right.
And because, I point that in my work that here's this mind virus, Watico, and it doesn't even exist. There's no independent intrinsic existence. There's no such thing at all.
Right.
So if people feel like, oh, I should feel afraid or whatever, no. Watico feeds off of fear, because as soon as
Right.
there's fear, fear is an expression of there's other, and then there's separation, and then you feel afraid, and then Watico feeds off of that. So, the thing is that, yeah, the Watico idea really maps on to what the Course calls the ego. And particularly what's interesting, and I can explain this, I mean, this is, I have a number of ways in my imagination of explaining it, but there's no existence to Watico at all, and yet it can destroy our entire species. And
Right.
right there is the paradox.
And that's exactly what the ego is. I mean, the ego in A Course in Miracles has no reality at all either.
Right.
There's no ego in heaven, for example. That would be an impossibility. And there need not be an ego in us either. And yet at the same time that that's true, it seems to be like this thing which dominates. And not just dominates, but rules the world, rules our lives, and
Yeah, yeah,
also
yeah.
and all ruins as well as rules. You know, that seems to be its function. It's to sort of, the course begins with the opposite of love is fear, but what's all encompassing can't have an opposite. So it's really this fear
Right.
thing, which interestingly enough, I think I mentioned that this lady I'm going to have on, Patricia, in March, talking about one of the conflicts that she ran into with the traditional church, that I ran into with the traditional church, is the Course in Miracles makes it really clear. There's no hell, there's no devil, but traditional Christianity then winds up saying there is a hell and a devil. And now we got a problem, because if you don't believe in hell, you're going to hell. This is
Right.
ridiculous and absurd. Let's go back to you. I'll let you talk more about what the Watico is.
Yeah, yeah. So one way of understanding Watico, I mean, is to really, take in that it's been articulated in every spiritual tradition throughout history. but it's just called by not by Watico name, but by different names. And a very simple way of understanding in the Bible, in the apocryphal texts, they'll talk about this counterfeiting, this counterfeiting spirit. And the way it describes this counterfeiting spirit, it's precisely pointing out Watico. And the thing which is interesting, this phrase, the counterfeiting spirit, got edited out of the Bible. And I point out in my work that, because Watico was on the editorial board, and you see, it can't stand to be exposed. So it made sure to edit out, because when we see how Watico works, then it has no power. Then we take away its power, because it operates through the unconscious, through the part of us. We all have this part that has this, blind spot. It's a form of this blindness. And so as long as we don't see it, it has power over us. My whole work is trying to flood light on, here's how it operates. And it actually configures events in the outside world and non-locally then through our reactions. As we react to when we see Watico playing out, if we're not awake in that moment, and if we're just reacting out of our, compulsive triggers, then we ourselves become a vector through which Watico, incarnates further in the world. But if I can just get back to that counterfeiting spirit, because here's how Watico works. It has no creativity at all, okay? But it plugs into our creative spirit. And, but it has no creativity, but it's a master impersonator. Wow. It puts us on, it fools us, it tricks us. And what it does, it offers us this fictitious identity. Oh, I'm wounded, I'm traumatized. Oh, you're a skin encapsulated ego, you have these problems, whatever the content is. And you see, but if we're in touch with our true nature, it has no power over us whatsoever. But if in that moment that it presents to us this fictitious, limited version of who we are, and if we get hooked by that and identify with that, then it has us. Then it can manipulate us and it can control us. And, now just to think for a moment what I just described, 3 things. The first is we actually give ourselves away. Second, we identify with who we're not. And third, we disconnect from our creative power. That's a recipe for madness. And that's in essence what Watico is.
Can we say that in essence it's fear?
Yeah, well, that would be another way of describing it, because like I had previously mentioned, fear is the fuel, is the food for Watico. And fear emerges as soon as we identify with a separate self, okay? And as soon as we identify with a separate self, there is other. And as soon as there is other that's not us, then fear arises. And as soon as fear arises, that's the fuel for Watico. And Watico feeds off of and into the fear. It's a self-reinforcing feedback loop. And, when we see this in the world today with all the incredible fear that's just being inculcated endlessly by, with all the mainstream media and stuff. So sure.
All right. Yeah, again, what it says in the very, very first paragraph of the course is the opposite of love is fear. But what is all-encompassing cannot have as an opposite. Love is all-encompassing. Love cannot have an opposite. But it sure looks like there is within the context of the dream. So a lot of what you're tapping onto is the dream within the dream, so to speak.
Yeah, well, right. So in other words, when I began having this awakening experience, like I was saying, a way of very simply describing it, I was realizing, oh my God, this is a dream. We're collectively having this shared dream. And the thing about the dream is that things can actually manifest as if they're, objectively existing. And as if they will manifest, they will appear as if they actually intrinsically exist. And see, here's the mind-blowing thing. Being like a dream, as soon as we think that things like objectively exist, being like a dream, the dream is nothing other than a reflection of our mind. Then the dream will shapeshift and offer us all the evidence confirming our viewpoint that the world is objective. So now we have all the evidence. We have the proof confirming, what we're seeing is real, is really out there. It certainly appears that way. And now we have the evidence confirming it is real because the dream is reflecting back offering us the evidence. So then we get more entrenched in our viewpoint of thinking this world is real and separate and objective. And the more we see it that way, the more the dream just reflects back, giving us all the evidence. And it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop that goes on ad infinitum until we see through it. And that's the creation of Watico. And what I'm describing, we've literally hypnotized ourselves by the genius of our own mind. That's in essence what I'm pointing at. And that's what people are telling. That's exactly what the course is pointing out.
Yeah. So if I'm watching Fox News or I'm watching CNN, what I'm really seeing is this sort of this reinforcement. Yes, there's a problem out there and they're the ones that are responsible for it. And look how bad these guys are. And I get a whole lot of other people to agree with me about that.
Yeah, and then we're in this echo chamber of our own mind because the way Watico works, it actually distracts us and makes us think that the problem is outside of ourselves. So it makes us think that the source of the problem and the solution is outside of ourselves. And so then we become entranced by the forms of the dream, putting all our attention out there. And meanwhile, in doing that, the Watico bug inside of us is just feasting, is just gorging on our unawareness,
Right.
For
so
sure.
Now I can say things that it's okay to go to war. I mean, we must go to war.
Totally.
If
We
go to
justify. And the thing about Watico, it's a collective psychosis. So what I'm describing happens in an individual psyche. But when a number of people's psyches, when that's happening, when there's millions of people, then it's a psychic epidemic. Then it's a collective psychosis where everybody is reinforcing their own madness and they can justify going to war or, they can project the shadow onto this person or that person. And it's madness. And that's what's happening in the world. But what I'm pointing out is that encoded in Watico is its own vaccine, that it actually contains its own medicine. It's actually helping us to wake up, to the dreamlike nature. But if we don't have the recognition of what it's showing us, then it just is programmed to destroy us.
So we've got to get conscious of the fact that it's there.
Yeah, well, because it works through us being unconscious. That's why my entire work is trying to shed light on the covert operations of Watico. And if I can just give you an example, so I had written a book on physics, on quantum physics, because I had realized, oh my God, quantum physics is offering us the medicine for Watico. And what I particularly mean, I can go into it a lot, but before quantum physics came on the scene, physicists thought this world existed objectively, and they were just studying it, as passive observers trying to understand it. And then, in essence, quantum physics comes along, and it empirically it just shows that there's no such thing as an objective world. That's just an idea that exists inside of our mind. It has no correlate in actual reality. And, and even to take it a step further, the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe observed. And that, by the way, is a description of a dream. Well, when you realize that there's no objective world, well, then what happened to the subject?
Yeah.
Because we, as a subject, we have to have an object to be a subject, to be in relationship to the object. But when you see through that there's nothing objective, then all of a sudden it floods light on the nature of the subject, on you.
Right.
And that, because we've gotten entranced in thinking we exist in a way that we don't, as a skin encapsulated ego. So that's where, like, quantum physics is actually, flooding light on who we are,
Right. So there's this interesting line in the Course in Miracles where it says there's nothing outside of you.
Right.
Yeah, and that's
exactly.
That's what it's saying. Like those six words, right? There's nothing
Yeah. And that's exactly what I'm saying too, but just in a different way. Because when I had that experience in 1981, that changed my life. Now, the thing to understand, when I had that experience, things began happening in my actual life that were physically impossible. That could only happen in dreams. And I was meeting my teachers, these great enlightened beings. And particularly when I was around them, it was like the third dimensional space-time continuum would just shift, and completely these miracles, these totally impossible things, would happen. And what I was realizing was that, wait a second, we're dreaming up, this is a collectively shared dream. But we've entranced ourselves in such a way that we don't have that realization. And when I was realizing more and more that this is a dream, that it's the same thing in a night dream. When you're in a night dream and you have that lucid dream, you recognize, oh, there's nothing outside of myself. It's all everybody's my own dream character. I'm inside of my mind. There's nothing separate. It's all just reflecting who I am. We're interdependent and interconnected. So then you have this mind-blowing realization, oh my God, there's nothing outside of me, but the me isn't the skin encapsulated ego that you're identifying with. No, you've actually expanded your sense of identity to include the whole universe.
Wow. So we get out of this by, I'll
Well,
let you complete that.
yeah, we can get out of this by remembering who we are. Okay. And that's what the Course is pointing at.
That's right.
That's what my teachers are one pointedly every moment pointing at. And I'm still a work in progress, like all of us are. And, I just see that to the extent I connect with my true nature. Well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, my true nature is by its nature creative. So when I have the realization of my true nature, what happens? I express myself creatively. And what happens then? The more I express myself creatively, the more I deepen my knowing of my true nature. It becomes a self-reinforcing feedback loop that creates light upon light. That's like plugging into the source of the universe in a way where we become a conduit to express and embody compassion, love, wisdom. And we actually connect with our nature as creative beings. Because what I point out is that being creative, you see, we're creative 24/7 all the time, but a lot of us don't know that we're creative. So our creativity unconsciously gets turned against us in a way that's killing us. What I'm pointing at, when you remember who you are and tap into your nature, you express yourself creatively, and that's the medicine for Watico. And then when you connect with other people who are also having that realization and you get in sync with each other, that's when we can change the world. And that's not a new age woo-woo magical thinking idea.
I know.
That's what this is all about.
Right. So when this is completely in line with the Course. So when the Course talks about creativity, it really means, we could talk about love. We could say it's loving. It's the loving part of us that's being expressed in the world. It's not just limited to some sort of creative act, but it's a thing that I do in all my relationships.
Totally. And a way I would articulate that is like, because my whole life is focused around being creative, and when I'm talking about being creative, I'm not just talking about painting or sculpture or drawing. That's very flatland. I mean, yeah, that's great. But I'm talking about, we are creating our experience of ourselves, and we are creating our experience of the world each and every moment. There's no one else who's doing that. We're doing that. Okay. We have this creative agency. And what I'm actually talking about in being creative is, just offering ourselves as an instrument for something that's beyond the ego to come through, and that we become the conduit, for that love, for that compassion. And, and it's as if we then become an agent for the healing that's thirsting to happen in the universe, to become catalyzed by us just being an open instrument and having that creative spirit come through us.
I see that creative spirit just as one of really progressively more and more loving, all the time, in all places, whatever it is that I'm loving, whatever it is that's in front of me. I'm loving this person, this dog, this piece of nature, whatever it is, and I'm throwing myself in and getting really excited, because that's also what the kingdom of heaven is.
Yeah, and that includes like having love for the part of you that is contracted, having love for the part of you that doesn't love,
Yeah.
And
how I started to say, that's one of the ways we discover how rich you are. You discover how rich you are, but by giving your richness away.
Yeah. Well, that's, one of the major practices that I do in my Tibetan Buddhist practice is, that healing, that love, that light that my ego wants to keep for me. No, just my practice is just to continually offer that and give what my ego thinks I want to keep for myself. And no, just to offer that, because then that helps to dispel the imagination that we exist separate, because I would only authentically give it if I have the recognition. Well, who am I giving it to? I'm giving it to these parts of myself.
So this helps to wake up the whole universe.
Yeah, well, the whole universe is already awake. I mean, that's the trip.
Yeah,
Even though it's very convincing that, oh my God, we're under a spell and we're asleep and all that. On one level, that's absolutely true.
Right.
But from the atemporal dimension, we've already woken up, and and it's so helpful for each of us when we actually recognize that and embody that and connect with that and become familiar with that. And then when we meet people, they can have a very convincing disguise of being wounded and asleep and all that. But if we get hooked by that disguise and think that's who they are, then we've concretized them in this limited way. And then we're unwittingly helping, we're keeping them asleep by seeing them in that way. So, and how I first understood this was with my teachers. When I got out of that last hospital, I had met my teachers, these great enlightened beings, who they're like family now. I mean, I've known them close, for, since the early 80s. And I would be like all the time describing the pain and the suffering and the trauma from my father, from the hospitals, the demons, the this, the that. And they would, they would honor me, but I realized they weren't taking me seriously. They weren't getting hooked by this identity that I was presenting, because they were in touch with their own wholeness and and who they were. They were seeing me in my wholeness. They were seeing me as already awake. And by them seeing me that way, it helped me to see myself in that way. It created a bridge for me to step into that awakened, whole, healed part of myself. And I've realized that's in a way what I've just do because I have a private practice, and but I'm only able to do that to the extent that I'm in touch with my own wholeness.
Right. The Course of Miracles is asking exactly the same thing of us. It's asking us to wake up to that realization. I love the definition of Jesus that appears in the Course. Jesus was a man who saw the face of Christ in all of his brothers and sisters and remembered God. How do you remember God? By seeing the face of Christ in all of his brothers and sisters. I mean, that's incredible. That's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah. And in my practice in Tibetan Buddhism, that's one of the major practices. They call it having like perception, like pure perception. And that is every moment of your day, you have the recognition, this is the dream. And everybody you're meeting is Buddha, is the enlightened one. Right. And it's a practice, and it's something you just do, both in your day, in your waking experience, and also at night.
Mm-hmm. This is absolutely key to the Course, because one of the key parts of the Course is chapter 21, first chapter, first sentence, projection makes perception. So if projection makes perception, then the world is as I'm making it. And then the Course says nothing more than that.
Right. And that's so profound, because, for example, in Tibetan tradition, they have these phenomena. They're called terma, and terma are the hidden treasures that are encoded in the multidimensional fabric of the cosmos, that right when it's time, right when there's a need, they're discovered by the person who's destined to discover that particular hidden treasure to help the practitioners get back in balance. Now, there's one terma, and I've sort of, in my work, I'll talk about this, where it basically says, and I've essentialized this terma into 4 words, and the words are, as viewed, so appears. Okay, as viewed, so appears. Now, just think about a dream. As you view the dream, when you're in a night dream, the dream is nothing other than a projection, than a reflection of your own mind. The way you view the dream instantaneously, it's happening over time, but it happens in no time. As viewed, the dream will appear exactly reflecting the point of view of the viewer, because the two are the same. But then we become entranced by thinking it's separate and objective, and we react and we become conditioned. And that opens the door for Watico. So that sentence about projection makes perception, that's exactly it. Because Watico, it works through the projective tendencies of the mind. And psychologically, it works through once we project the shadow outside of ourselves and dream up our own evil outside of ourselves. I can talk for hours about that. We then become possessed by the very evil that we're trying to destroy outside of ourselves. And that's madness. And that's Watico.
Yeah. This is marvelous in terms of understanding how the whole psychic system works. It really is. I know a lot of what you've done is based on Jungian psychology, who obviously
Right.
saw this as well. Right.
Totally. Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to talk a little bit about, my sense is that there's a kind of a really profound awakening that's going on in human consciousness right now. And I think a part of this awakening, we're going to relate to COVID here a little bit. It's part of it, but that there's a kind of a new awareness that comes out by seeing the very thing that you've seen, which then means that we can now do something about it. This is also related, I think, to the death of the mainline Protestantism and the church. It's going very, very rapidly downhill. I don't know whether most people are aware of how fast that it's going. And COVID is added to it because COVID has actually closed some of the smaller churches. And there's a question about whether or not they'll ever be able to wake again. So there's another kind of awakening that's going on, which isn't limited to rules and regulations and creeds and dogmas and what's going on in the local building at the end of the block. If you hear what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, I think, okay, here's how I understand it. In an individual person's process, when they're really pushed right to the edge and they're right at the cliff and they're in the corner and they're double bound and there's no way out, typically in an individual person's process, that's when all of a sudden they have the breakthrough. That's when they have grace or lucidity that they weren't able to have when they weren't quite at that dangerous edge in their process. What I'm describing in a person's process, I feel that's what's actually happening collectively. We as a species are pushing ourselves right to the edge of a cliff where we're in the process of potentially just destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet, which would destroy ourselves and all that. But encoded in that is there some form of deeper awakening that's happening through, all of us. And I point out in my work that the second coming, it's not just going to be this physical guy who's coming on a chariot down it, but no, that it's incarnating through us. We are the vehicle of, through the collective unconscious, as we become more conscious of who we are and who each of us are, and who we all are, that we then become the conduit to incarnate, and embody that second coming.
Right. The Course talks about this in terms of the phrase it uses. It calls it the turning point. So the turning point occurs when you get to the point actually of saying there must be a better way. Enough. Enough of the insanity. Enough of the whole Course in Miracles itself, we believe, got started when Helen and Bill, who had a difficult relationship with each other, Bill turns to Helen one day and says there must be another way. Meaning there must be some way that we can get along with each other, and Helen, uncharacteristic of herself, turned back to Bill and says, "You're right, I'll help you find it." That became the Course in Miracles. The whole other way of being able to see. Yeah.
And that, in a way, I mean, that's to step out, of that imagination, that we exist in a way that we don't. Like, the Course talks about, I think, having like the willingness, the little willingness.
That's right, yeah.
Something like that. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they're talking about the exact same thing. I mean, what the Buddha realized, because he was a doctor of the soul and he found the cure for the disease of suffering of humanity. And that was in essence his realization. And what he discovered was that, to the extent we're clinging onto this imaginary self that doesn't even exist in the way that we think it does, and then we protect it and defend it and invest all of our energy into protecting and defending and conceiving of it, as being this precious thing, and it doesn't even exist.
That's an illusion.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like a phantom that is an apparition that we, out of our infinite creativity, have invested with our own creative agency, and then we feel powerless with regard to it. But we're the one who's giving it its power. It doesn't have any existence. That,
Right.
in essence, is what the Buddha, that's the
Right.
realization he had.
Yeah.
And so when that other way is when you actually, the way to heal that clinging, it's not like you need to do something to heal it. No, you're doing it. You just need to stop clinging and to let your light shine. Our nature is light,
Yeah.
and then to let our light shine and just to embody
Yeah,
that
sure.
realization.
So what we're doing is we're awakening to the dream within the dream, so that we become aware of the fact that that's what we're doing, so that we don't have to take this thing so seriously, and we can start living as what you called a creative life.
Yeah. Well, one way of understanding it, I mean, is just imagine being in a night dream, right? And then you have the realization of the nature of your circumstance, i.e., that you're in a night dream and you have lucidity. And then imagine that other of your dream characters in that night dream who are just parts of you, they're also having a lucid dream and they're having that same realization. And then imagine coming together and just contemplating what you're realizing, going, oh my God, this universe that we're in, this dream is manifesting the way it is because we're dreaming it. We've been
Yeah.
conditioned based on fear to dream it up, to reflect back
Right.
our on state of unconsciousness. When you have enough people who have that realization, who come together, I easily find myself imagining what they can realize is, oh my God, we can dream it different. We
Yeah.
can change the dream. And that's to actually begin to step in consciously to our evolution, that
Yeah.
we're actually being invited to step in to our own evolutionary process. And that's what all of this is about, because Watico, it's a collective psychosis. It's the source of the deepest evil, but it's also this revelation. It's a revelatory phenomena.
Cool.
It's reflecting back to us our unconscious. It's showing us exactly what we need to know. And
Right.
if we receive its gift and take in what it's revealing to us, then we discover that encoded in the pathogen is the medicine. But
Yeah.
if we don't recognize that, then it'll just kill us.
Right. So we're waking up. That's what's really exciting. We're waking up in a universal kind of way, in an individual way, but also in a collective way, which it's interesting that when Buddha has his great enlightenment, he goes back to the deer park of Benares, and the disciples see him come in. They say, "There's something changed about you. What is it?" And he says, "I'm awake."
Right.
I'm awake. Yes, it's that simple. It's just a process of waking up. But in order to wake up, you got to realize that you were dreaming. I
Yeah.
was in a dream.
Right. Right.
Right.
No, totally. And it's so easy though when we awaken in a dream, to then, if we're not careful, to then identify subtly with different identities or forms of the dream. And so the idea is that's in Buddhism. That's why people do practice. You're continually just becoming familiar with that lucid state, with that state of openness, with
Hmm.
that state of expanded awareness. And part of that expanded awareness is having that open heart,
Right.
because even in the Bible, they'll talk about there's this mind blindness and they'll correlate it to a closed heart. So you see, when I'm talking about seeing Watico, well, first off, it's not something you see as an object with
Right.
you as a subject. Because if
Right.
people say, oh, no, I found Watico and this is what it looks like. No, it's formless, but it can take on any form. Don't get entranced by
Right.
the form. But when you see Watico, how it operates in the world by configuring events in the world to reflect back a psyche that's under its thrall, and it operates through our unconscious reactions to its manifestation in the world, to actually begin to see that and then to not solidify yourself, to not get, caught in any identity at all, and to not concretize anybody. But it's all
Right.
just the dream unfolding. And
Yeah.
then the expression of that is a compassion, is the open heart. And that's what we're really talking about. And that
Wow.
non-locally, energetically, has an enormous impact on the entire universe.
Oh yeah. I love it when in Marumi, one of the lines of one of his better known poems, "Don't go back to sleep. Don't go back to sleep. Don't go back to sleep."
Yeah, yeah,
It's like
yeah.
we need this kind of constant, almost reminder. Oh my God, I woke up here, but now how do I how do I stay awake? Now
Yeah, well,
become more creative.
yeah, well, that's a process that I'm super into, because that's the idea also when you connect with other people, with like the Sangha in Buddhism, the community, the mystical body of Christ. You discover we can all, like, conspire in a way to co-inspire each other. We can actually help each other. We can play the role of helping each other to stabilize that realization, that lucidity. And at the same time, one of the things that I'm also teaching is that we can, in a playful way, intervene in the dream to plant clues in our waking life to help stimulate our lucidity. If I
Yeah,
can just give an
wonderful.
example, I mean, here, this is,
Please.
yeah, yeah. So say if tomorrow when I leave my house, I have this something that I have to remember to bring, right? And so say I'll take this pillow and I'll put it in front of my front door. So then the next day I'm leaving and I see the pillow, and that reminds me to bring the thing that I wanted to remember to do. Now,
Oh,
just think about what just happened. In the moment of placing that pillow in front of the door, I planted a clue for a future self, the part of me the next day that was about to leave.
good.
And I
Yeah.
saw the clue
Yeah.
like a time release capsule. There it was, right as I'm about to leave. It helped me to remember, well, oh yeah, I need to remember to do something. So that's interesting that right now we can plant clues in the fabric of our waking life to
Yeah.
help us remember to wake up. But even the deeper point is we're already doing that. The part of us that is the true nature, the deeper dreaming self, is what I call it. It's planted clues in the dream all throughout the
Wonderful.
multidimensional fabric of the universe. And all we have to do is have open eyes to have the recognition of that.
Wow, this is so great. It really is. I mean, it's really, I think a lot of people here that will get to this in discussion are seeing the same thing that we're talking about right now. We're only about 5 or 6 minutes away from our first break, or our only break, but I'd like to get on to the topic of COVID, if you don't mind.
Yeah, yeah, for
Just
sure.
because that's on everybody's mind right now,
Yeah,
and how
yeah.
that relates to this whole
Yeah,
thing.
I could say a lot about that. Like in my new book that just came out, the whole, like the final part of the book is all about COVID, and I point out that COVID is Watico, but I point out how to see that. Like it's a mistake if we think that COVID is just this physical virus. No,
Yeah,
no, no. It's not just physical. Think about it. COVID, once it came into our world, it impacted every aspect of our lives. How we behave, what we wear, what we think about, how we interact with each other, what we dream. It brings up all this fear. It's changed the political system, the economic system, the
hmm hmm
laws. Every aspect of our lives has been changed by COVID. That is to say that COVID has like this subtle body, not just physical, but has multiple vectors of transmission. It has an emotional vector, a spiritual, a psychological, an etheric, an astral, a behavioral, in addition to the physical virus. It's all just like these multidimensional facets of the disease. But keep in mind that we ourselves are changing our behavior, in all these ways, collectively and individually, based on this virus. But all of that change in behavior gets mediated through the psyche. And the psyche is the arena, is the source, and the medium through which the mind virus operates. So the mind virus, the Watico mind virus, is the real deadly virus, where COVID is just, I call it this
yeah,
emanation, like a superficial emanation into the 3D world of the higher dimensional mind virus, which is the real virus that's afflicted our species, that can kill us. So what I'm pointing out is that there is a way of viewing the global pandemic, that actually helps us to see the Watico mind virus. Because as long as we don't see it, it has power over us. But as soon as we begin to see it, we take away its power over us and we become empowered.
it's like one of the things in a lot of traditions. I think you mentioned this in one of your books about the way you get rid of the devil is by calling the devil by name. I mean, you identify
Yeah,
what the
yeah,
thing
yeah.
is, and this is an illusion, or this is a dream, or what. But that's got to be really clear before you can step away from it. You
Oh,
got to come to
totally.
the way.
Well, that symbolizes, I mean, in all fairy tales or mythology, they'll always
Yeah,
talk about finding the name of the offending demon, and that symbolizes that you see it, like you objectified it, because as
yeah,
long as you don't, see it in an objective way, as if it's separate from you, well, then it's operating. Then you're unconsciously identified. Then it's the
right,
lens through which you're seeing, and you can't see it. So then it's informing and unconsciously it's giving shape to your behavior. So
right.
that's why it's so important to find and it doesn't make a difference what the name is, whether it's Watico or the ego or devil or every tradition, like I said before, is pointing out Watico. They all call it a different name, but to actually find the name is not only to objectify it and see it, but then to add consciousness to it and to distinguish yourself from it. So all of a sudden now, instead of unconsciously being possessed by it or acting it out or being identified with it, you then have a relationship to it. And what I'm pointing out is that you can actually see that, ultimately speaking, it doesn't even exist.
Right.
And then it just dissolves back into the emptiness out of which it arose.
Right.
And that's when all of a sudden all of your energy that was bound up in the repetition compulsion of the trauma or fighting evil or your wound or the abuse issues, all of that energy that was invested in the black hole of just trying to heal yourself becomes available for being creative and loving and having
Yeah.
compassion.
We get back to the Beatles. All you need is love. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
really
for
is true.
sure.
I mean, it really is true. All this stuff that we're afraid of and that we're projecting out there, but it's wonderful. I mean, I think it's wonderful to recognize I'm waking up, the world is waking up, we're sharing this experience, we're all waking up together, and that makes it a lot of fun. That's the creative part of the whole thing. It's a very
Yeah.
exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, well, I would even say we've all chosen to incarnate in this very time, because we have a role to play. And that's one of the things when you step out of that fear or, that story of, oh, I can't be creative because, and then we have whatever story, oh, I'm not good enough, I'll be judged, it won't be perfect, whatever. But just if when we have the courage to step into ourselves, to step into not only ourselves, but, that creative role that's ours to play. And it's not that everybody is going to be, creating books like me or,
Right.
teaching. No, it just might mean being a good husband or wife or
Exactly.
parent or
Yeah, sure.
whatever, but to actually have the courage to step out of our fictitious identity, to connect with our nature, to connect with our inner voice, with our calling, because we're all being called to something
Yes.
that's
Right.
beyond
Right.
ourselves. And to do that, and particularly when you connect with other people who are doing that, and you realize,
Hmm.
wow, it's not a competitive sport, but if I
Right.
help you and support you
Right.
in stepping into your calling, I get as much benefit as you do because we're not separate.
Right.
Then it becomes incredible fun and incredibly healing.
Yeah. This is fun. I mean, what's more exciting than waking up and being free of nightmares and dreams and illusions and insanity? Oh, that's great. We're
Yeah.
actually at the time for our break. This has all gone very, very quickly. It always does in this like 50 minutes or so we spend together. So what we're going to do now.
The hush of heaven holds my heart today. The hush of heaven holds my heart today.
Well, we're back. And Paul, this has been really, really exciting. This morning I knew it was going to be. In good part because I think we're opening a door here. An incredible door to another dimension, another ability to see on the one hand something maybe we don't want to see, but on the other hand to realize that we have an opportunity to clean that up and to step forward into brighter light than we've been in before. Bud is going to start by sharing some of the things that he noticed coming up in the chat, and then we'll have an opportunity for folks to dialogue with you or myself. What's going on, Bud?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to share that at a high level, there's been a lot of very warm, supportive, positive feedback speaking about the dialogue between the two of you. People are really enjoying the way that we wove ACIM, Tibetan Buddhism, and even the Bible all together, looking through the lens of what our experience of this dream is. And so I have a couple questions directly for Paul. And the first is, Paul, can you share some more experiences of things that can't happen? You mentioned that right at the outset.
Yeah. Not really. I mean, I can share one experience. This isn't a physically impossible one, but it's a unbelievably, highly, ridiculously unlikely one. But there were like others that my inner guidance has just told me, no, don't share that publicly. You're not to share that. But I can describe, it was like, and it's taken me decades to realize, it was like having this quantum jump in one instant from being in one universe to another universe. And the second universe looked exactly the same as the first universe, but it was radically different, particularly from the point of view of what I had conceived of as being impossible. All of a sudden that had just been blown to smithereens. And I realized, oh my God, I had been entranced, conditioned to think certain things were impossible and certain things were possible. And from these experiences, that really got, sort of enlarged. But the one experience I can share just really briefly, it's the one experience that I've been given permission to share from my inner guidance. When I had my awakening, I got hit by a bolt of lightning. I'd been in such intense suffering for a couple years, went inwards, hours a day, sitting in meditation, get hit by a bolt of lightning, then begin within hours having this realization of, oh my God, this is a collective dream. And I was so excited and enthusiastic that I immediately got brought by ambulance to a psychiatric hospital. And in the psychiatric hospital, they bring me, it's nighttime, the patients had just had dinner, they bring me to the lounge, and in the room is this woman who's blind, an older woman, and her eyes are opaque. And I immediately, without even thinking about it, I just walk up to her, and I'm in this completely extreme altered state of having the recognition of, oh my God, this is a dream, and I'm waking up to that. And out of my mouth spontaneously, I say to this woman, all you have to do to see is open your eyes and look. And I keep on repeating those words. I'm looking in her eyes. I'm getting closer to her. The whole thing took about a minute, and she regained her sight. And then, right as if it was choreographed, they took me and they strapped me up on a bed for the night, and meanwhile, I'm like just contemplating what just happened. So that saved my life, that experience, because then the next couple of years I had fallen into psychiatry, and they kept on saying, no, you're mentally ill. And when you have experiences like that, and that was just the beginning, that was like sort of a minor experience compared to what came next. I knew I was having an awakening, and then I understood, oh yeah, she was hysterically blind. And I mean, it's an unbelievable story, but the tragedy, it had a tragic aspect in that my parents both died, completely having bought into the psychiatric systems, their image of your son is in denial of his mental illness, and they took that to their grave. And I've just had to deal with that,
Good stuff.
And actually, could I just say one thing too? Encoded in that experience with that blind woman, I just realized this over the last year, is the whole sort of creation of Watico and the solution. Because Watico is a self-induced blindness, right? It's a form of psychic blindness, but it's a blindness that we're doing to ourselves. She was hysterically blind, and inwardly she wasn't letting herself look. That was manifesting as her physical blindness. But then the solution, I was just so open. These words fell in my head. All you have to do to see is open your eyes and look. It was like I was just an open instrument for the healing that was ready to happen in the field to happen. And that sort of symbolically reflecting to us, what the solution for this mind virus is, that each of us, to the extent we step out of our own ego and are just available for the light that wants to come through us, that's going to help to catalyze the healing that's just wanting to happen.
What else, bud?
Paula, a related question is, have you seen that blind woman since that experience?
No, I didn't. The only time we ever spoke, the very next day after they unstrapped me, they they put me in a room, and I'm sitting in this room at a desk, and they're the only person sitting on the other side of the desk is this woman, this ex-blind woman, and she's smiling at me from ear to ear, not saying a word. And then my heart chakra just blossomed, and I realized, oh, I get it. She was hysterically blind, and I understood what had happened. And then she said to me the only word she ever said to me, and that is, she mentions, aren't you going to answer the phone call from, and she mentions my father's name. And then within like 10 seconds, the nurse, comes in the room and says, Paul, your father's on the phone, because they had just gotten word I had had a psychotic break. And so I never saw her again. I got out of that hospital after 3 days because the doctor reflected to me I had to prove to him that I wasn't insane, or he was going to keep me there for a long time. So I just became normal. I just stepped out of my extreme state and just began talking about my neuroses and my problems and blah, blah, blah. And he says, fine, you're normal. You can go. So that was how I got out of the hospital. But then I got together with the doctor the next week because he was a cool guy, and I called him up. I said, hey, look, can we have lunch? So we did. And I told him what happened with the blind woman, and he got incredibly uncomfortable. And he says, no, I can't, patient confidentiality, I can't talk about it. But what he did say to me, he goes, the fact that I was able to step out of my extreme state and just be fluid with my identities and step into being normal, that showed him that I wasn't crazy.
Oh, right. Okay.
I don't know if any of you who are with us today are Matrix fans like I am, but in this fourth release of the Matrix, it goes into this deep psychological exploration of us being trapped in the illusion, and how Watico, how the negative construct reframes our thinking so that we think that's normal, and that we think that we're having a psychotic break when we think outside of the matrix, outside of the box, when we think outside of the illusion. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So here's the next question. If everything is energy, then nothing is ever separate. Everything is one. So what did the Native Americans mean when they called Watico a spirit? It suggests that it's outside of us and something that can invade us.
Yeah. And that's, it's easy to get confused. Like, I'll think about in Tibetan Buddhism, and this correlates to the indigenous cultures, they'll talk about different dimensions of reality, of the dream. Just like you have a dream, if somebody shares a dream, you can interpret it in all different ways, and it's multidimensional, and they're all true depending on their viewpoint, on the perspective. And so in Buddhism, they talk about there's the absolute dimension of reality and the relative dimension of reality. And the absolute dimension of reality is all one. There's no separation. It's all a dream and all that. But then on the relative level of reality, these experiences manifest, like the Watico energy manifests as if we subjectively experience it as if it's some other. And what the Buddha taught was that the relative level of reality and the absolute level of reality interpenetrate. Don't think of them as separate. You have to honor both. Because a big mistake, people hear the absolute level of reality and they just go, oh, it's all one, and they just marginalize the relative. That's a big mistake. Or they just get identified with the relative and don't honor the absolute. The point is that you have to honor both.
Mm-hmm. Just like in a dream, the manifest and the latent content of the dream, too. You got those two parts to it.
Well, that's the Heart Sutra in Buddhism. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Emptiness is form appearing in the form of emptiness. The two interpenetrate. They're not separate.
One of the ways that I've been thinking about this lately is in a lot of the ancient, or the Hermes Trismegistus, if you go all the way back into, the Kabbalah and stuff like that, as above, so below. These two, what's going on in the body is, somehow there's a relationship always. In terms of, that's why the Course in Miracles says the real healing happens with the mind, that's the healing. It's not what happened. The physical thing may get healed too by some
Well,
physical agent, but at the same time that that's true, it's really the mind that's doing everything.
Well, what you just said is so right on, because another way of describing the awakening that I began having was I was realizing experientially that, oh my God, the primary stuff isn't matter, but it was, you could say it's consciousness.
Yeah.
You know, that's like really the fundamental matrix. And this is exactly what they've discovered in quantum physics. That's one of the
Yeah.
reasons that I wrote my book on quantum physics.
Wonderful. What else you got, bud? Anything or?
And that's a great segue to the next question. Is compassion and trust enough to keep one from passing COVID?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question because, you know, yeah, compassion, that's the expression of our nature. That's like when we connect with our nature, when we have the realization of the dreamlike nature, and we see through the imagination that we exist as a separate being, we, you know, the energetic expression of that is compassion. But then also to realize there are, you know, I know some incredibly, you know, who you could say they're embodying compassion in this life, and they've gotten COVID,
Right.
or they've transmitted COVID, because then there's the physical dimension that's part of the full spectrum of the dream. And one thing to think about, say if somebody is like this enlightened being, you know, in this world to whatever degree they are, and they get COVID, oh, is that an expression? Well, clearly you're not enlightened. Well, no, that's absurd. That's ridiculous. I would point out, well, what about, you know, we're all, because I write about that, we're like these shamans in training. We're all these wounded healers, these shamans, that's the deeper archetype that's activated in the collective psyche. It's the shamanic archetype. We're going through this death and, you know, this birth experience, descending into the underworld. And what that means, the shaman takes on the illness of the community, and they become ill themselves. But then they don't stay stuck in that illness. That process of falling ill becomes the way that they actually even more deeply connect to their wholeness, and energetically that helps to heal the community. So we as shamans in training, and say if we're an enlightened person and then we get COVID, well, who's to say we're not taking on the illness that's pervading the field? Or even if we just feel anxiety or stress or fear, that pervades the collective unconscious of our species. And instead of identifying with that and personalizing that, what if we, as this awakened person, are taking on that illness or experiencing it from the inside, you know, as the way to transmute it in ourselves, to more deeply connect us with who we are. And us doing that actually, you know, energetically helps the entire non-local field.
Wow. Yeah, I had COVID, by the way, and I really regarded it as a positive experience in the sense that it was like stepping away from the world for a while, to be locked up for 24 days in this hospital room, and had this opportunity of really going inside on a very deep level. I had no external computer with me or anything like that. It was really an enriching experience. Yeah, let's see what else there is.
Couple more questions. Paul, are you feeling any guidance to introduce your work to classic psychiatry, i.e. educational level psychology students?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really interesting you say that, and I'll give myself permission to be real in that one. I would love nothing more. And I've been fortunate. I've, you know, become friends with like some of the, you know, these world-class psychiatrists who we would, you know, just became friends, and a few of them they've died, but that was really healing for me. And part of my imagination, you know, is to, when the time is right, to introduce this to psychiatry, because what I'm talking about is not like sort of the classical sort of psychology that treats individuals as having a pathology, because I point out that we don't exist as individuals. We're not skin encapsulated egos. We exist in relation to other people who themselves don't exist intrinsically, independently from their own side, but they only exist relative to other people. There's no separate self. The mental health system is treating us as if we are separate selves. That's like the classical physics view superimposed onto psychology. I'm more pointing out this new paradigm, quantum psychology, that we don't exist in that fictitious way. We're all expressions of the non-local field and contained in the non-local field. But when I made that joke around, I'm going to be honest, I presented a couple of months ago to this whole like group of psychologists, analysts, PhDs, really whatever. And they were having a continuing education course, for credit, and they invited me to present, and they paid me all this money. And what this friend of mine was he was the one who invited me. He was one of the analysts, and he's a client of mine. And then I presented just like I presented this morning to all of you, right? And I was talking about my story and about my work. And then it got back to me that they were in agreement that I'm mentally ill. and the thing, it was so healing. It was so healing for me. And this just happened. This literally just happened a couple of months ago. And it was really healing for me because, from the dreaming point of view, 40 years ago, I had a room full of psychiatrists telling me the same thing. And I was like, no, I'm not. And it was like really hard and all this. Where when it happened 2 months ago, it was so healing because I didn't get hooked by it. I was just like, wow, they're just asleep. They just don't have any idea what they're talking about. And so it was actually profoundly healing for me to go through that.
I imagine it would. I have one last question, and then we can open it up to the people that have raised their hands. And this is a question, Paul, and John, you certainly can weigh in on this. Lee's wondering if what you described as your awakening experience as his, and this is what he experienced. He had a crystalline experience 30 years ago as having his locus of identity slip the body and seat for several hours as his soul. And his soul had that evening a lucid experience of this experience of the dream of being in a lifetime.
Yeah. That could I say something, John, or did you want to respond?
No, go no.
Yeah,
This is for you.
no, that really speaks to me because the way I see that, and I've presented this in my work, just imagine you have this Buddha, this meditating Buddha, and that's symbolic of our true self, say, or a meditating Christ, whatever symbol. And imagine that meditating enlightened figure is having a dream or an imagination. And that imagination or that dream is us and our life. And we're going through it and we're identified with this limited, identity of, oh, I'm Paul and I'm 65 years old and blah, blah, blah. And, and I can go my whole life and not realize that I'm just a dream of that deeper dreaming self, is what I call it, of that meditating Buddha, of that true nature, of that Christ. And keep in mind there, in a way, we each have that meditating Buddha who's meditating us, but there's really only one of it. You can think of, there's that one meditating Buddha who's symbolic of the true self, who's dreaming this whole universe, and we're just dream characters in its dream. And so what you just described, what that person's experience was, yeah, that maps on precisely to an awakening experience where you step out of the imagination of existing as a separate self, and you all of a sudden, become acquainted and intimately familiar with your nature as the dreamer of the dream.
If I might just a reflection on that, in terms of the Course, what it's asking us to do is to awaken to the realization that you are the Christ, to come to the same thing that Jesus came to, and to be able to embed it and embody that awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I could just say one thing, in my next book, the one that's coming out later this year, again and again and again, I'm talking about Christ with reference to Watico. I mean, what he's saying and what, it's unbelievable how it maps on, to the whole Watico idea.
Yeah. Let's go to some of the questions, and we'll start with Tucker.
Hey, guys, thank you. I get to go first. First of all, John, thank you so much for bringing Paul into my existence.
Sure.
I'm finding that the synchronicity of everything that is going on, whether it's your teachings, John, or Course in Miracles that I've done for 20 years, or as we talked about on Monday, the Chris Bache stuff of inducing a psychedelic experience to bring on this sort of like Watico, like Dark Night of the Soul is another name for it. And that what I was going to ask, and then it seems like John asked already, was I feel like that there's a huge spiritual awakening happening everywhere.
Yeah.
And but that somehow, you know, how do we deal with, for lack of a better word, republicanism, the psychiatric committee that wants to give me a conservatorship. I'm in a nursing home in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, and it seems as though, Paul, you're probably the same age as all of us, 76, 78 or whatever. And
He's a young guy.
I'm 60, 65. I'm a youngster.
He's only 65.
Oh,
Right.
he's a youngster.
Right.
God, how did you get all that wisdom? And but I love the fact that I spent a lot of time with Tibetans in Nepal when I was in the Peace Corps, and I see like at least 3 Tonkas back there. Mm-hmm. And what I'm intrigued is it you named both of your books, which is it's an American Indian tradition, Watico.
Yeah.
And that you're teaching Tibetan Buddhism, and how did you deal with the fact that the psychology committee still wants to call you crazy, even though your ideas are there? So that's all a big, huge.
Yeah, no, I get it. So I have a couple things to say. Yeah, and you know, the fact that they're still diagnosing me, I mean, that to me, it's really sad. You know, and my friend, you know, the young analyst who, you know, who invited me, it was great because he saw what was happening, and I never had the enlightened witness in my family system when there was like all the pathologizing and abuse. Being an only child, I never had anybody who could, you know, be the compassionate witness. So the fact that my friend, he was actually seeing that way, it was so profoundly healing, but it made me understand the level of unconsciousness, that here are these incredible analysts and, you know, Ph.D. psychologists, and I'm presenting just what I presented today. And all they knew, you know, they were like, oh, he's inflated. He doesn't have a sense of self. He's like, you know, bipolar, you know, whatever. It was unbelievable, but it made me realize that was an indication of the asleepness of, you know, that we're still dealing with in the collective unconsciousness. Now, the thing you mentioned too about like the republicanism or whatever, you see, never before in all of our history has the polarization in our world been so extreme. Now, Watico feeds off of polarization. It feeds off of fear. It feeds off of when we identify with the separate self. And what I'm trying to point out is when you see this as the dream, and, you know, when you can interpret it like the dream, you know, but I'm actually talking in a literal way that this is the dream, you have the realization that if we ourselves get polarized, like say if somebody out there is like embodying Watico and really asleep, well, Watico is non-local. If we then react and become polarized, then we're feeding Watico too. So it's such a great practice. It's one of the things that I offer to people is to try to at least entertain other people's points of view, particularly if they don't agree with you, and see what are they seeing? What is their blind spot? What are they seeing that I'm not? Are they seeing my blind spot? And then you're able to hold all points of view simultaneous. And yeah, at a certain point, it might be required to like step into a particular point of view, you know, but instead of just being caught in your echo chamber, you know, which might be based on fear, and then you're just fueling the whole mind virus, you know, throughout the field.
Right.
I just want to add that you actually mirrored, because I've been having problems with authority in this nursing home, and what my this guy that I also have a workshop with, Neil Donald Walsh,
Mhm.
it was just pointed out that fear and anger are nothing more than love transferred, and that when I can actually listen to my Republican friends, or I can try to not figure out where they come from
No.
or whatever, but just
Yeah,
listen
yeah. Right.
and find common ground.
Well,
as to
it's
what-
exactly what the Course says. There's only two actions, right? There's love and a cry for love, you know? So that would be a way of understanding it through that lens.
love and cry for. Yeah, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great. Okay, thank you.
Well,
I
thank you.
Thank you.
had a wonderful amount of time.
Let's go to Rosie. Rosie, you want to come on?
Yes, good afternoon. I had a question for Paul. Can you speak, and according to your internal guidance, whether you feel that you should or shouldn't, because I'm almost through your Dispelling Watico book. The process, I know you had this like lightning, kind of rod kind of thing that struck you. Can you talk to what was going on in your thought process or in your awareness just before this happened? What was the
totally.
process?
Totally. No, that's a beautiful question. I'm happy to share about that. So without going into the story, I should say I wrote a 600-page book about the story,
Yeah.
My own memoir, but there was this incredible trauma that happened, this unbelievable abuse thing happened, and my father was just the instrument. I don't want to solidify him as being like an evil guy, but he just was the conduit for his unhealed abuse to act out. Like, he didn't deal with it. So then, of course, what do? You act it out on the next of kin. And being the only child and being really sensitive, I was the recipient of him, like, sort of he gave me this transmission of, acting out his unhealed abuse. And I remember it was an increasing number of episodes that happened. And then the worst episode was so horrific that I woke up the next morning with a fever, and I had that fever for a year. And I went to hospitals and doctors, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me. At the end of that year, something strange happened. And that was the external event of the abuse. The dynamics that had played out again and again with my father had now become internalized. And now it was like, the abuser had exited stage left, so to speak. And this is typical. This is what makes abuse problematic, is that you introject it, you internalize it within your mind. And then I was doing it. I was reenacting it. I was recreating every moment. And that's what I meant when I said I went from being a happy, healthy person to not being able to live my life. Because all of a sudden, once that blossomed, I knew I had a big problem. And that's when I went inwards. And so, and it was like 24/7. It was like, oh my God, I knew I couldn't postpone dealing with this. So I was going to therapy and that was when I first started doing Vipassana and first began studying spiritual teachings and finding my teachers and all of that. And so I was like totally feeling that, and it felt completely double bound. Like I was double bound. It felt like I was on the cross, so to speak, what the cross symbolically represents, in that there was this incredible creative tension, and then out of just sitting with that hours and hours and hours a day, just being mindful, just being present with it. And it was agonizing, that's when all of a sudden, just spontaneously, the lightning bolt ignited in my brain just for a nanosecond. And within hours, that's when my experience began happening. But it was profound, unbelievable suffering, the likes of which I never even could have imagined, So that was really the origin of my experience.
Can I ask you a follow-up, please?
Yeah, for sure.
As I understand it in your book, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was like you explained, like it was your father's Watico transferred to you.
Right. Right.
So when you had this experience of this lightning, this nanosecond that you say, that didn't dispel the Watico completely, I take it, because you ended up in the hospital. And if we
Yeah.
go with this projection makes perception thing, which I agree with, then you're still suffering tremendously now in the hospital, right?
Totally. Well, what if I can just clarify? So, in other
Yes.
words, once I got hit by that bolt of lightning, something unlocked in me, something opened, and it was like going from like a light bulb that was 60 watts to all of a sudden being like a quadrillion watts. And there was so much creative energy coming through me. And I see now all I needed was just to have people recognize, like indigenous cultures would recognize when somebody's acting kind of weird. Oh, they might be having an initiation into being a healer or a teacher or something like that. But in the West, they don't know that. They just immediately pathologize and so give you antipsychotics and abort your process. And then, of course, the more they were pathologizing me and seeing me as sick and medicating me, the sicker I got. And then the sicker I got, that served as evidence to them that their diagnosis was correct. It was like this diabolical feedback loop. And that was get me out of there crazy. That was when I knew right away I have to get out of the psych system as soon as I could. But the point was that I hadn't integrated, getting hit by that lightning and all this energy. It was like having a beach ball that you push underneath the ocean and then you let it go up and it just goes way, way up in the air. But then over time, it gets more like, sort of balanced. So all I needed was for somebody to recognize, oh yeah, Paul is going through some sort of deeper shamanic initiatory spiritual awakening process. Why don't let's take care of him, make sure he's okay, and create a container for him to integrate and unfold. If somebody had done that, because I was just a free agent out in the world, I hadn't found my teachers yet. I was, wasn't in a monastery, wasn't in an ashram. And so I kept on, I was freaking people out sufficiently that I kept on getting hospitalized, whereas now I've integrated sufficiently to be able to fluidly navigate between, I'm very much in consensus reality. I pay my bills, I balance my checkbook, and I have access to these incredible mystical states every day. And I'm fluidly able to go back and forth as needed, So that's why it was really, I'm hoping I'm giving you a sense of, and particularly because you're in such a vulnerable state when you're awakening, because all of the conditioning, it was like my program. Like think of in a computer where you uninstall the programming. It was like all of my conditioning had been uninstalled. And for the first time in my life, I felt incredibly unself-conscious. I felt free, where I'd always had a little bit of, like most of us do, of self-consciousness. It was completely gone. And it was such a relief to just express that. But it wasn't integrated yet. But the more that I was being pathologized by the doctors, by my friends, by my family, you're so vulnerable and fragile. Yeah, you take on that energy and it can make you sick, So I could say a lot more, but I'm hoping that's at least answering a little bit of your question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So it sounds to me like you were, I don't know, I'm a visual learner, so it's
Yeah.
But what you're speaking of is like this blossoming of your real identity, as the Course speaks, your divine identity, your identity as part of Christ, as Christ.
Yeah.
And that was submerged, and that coming up is what caused this kind of imbalance until you were able to accept that completely, that is your identity.
Yeah, well, I'm still a work in progress, but keep in mind, so what happened, now this is interesting. In that first hospital with the blind woman, here I'm this Jewish person who was doing Buddhist practice, and I had this palpable sense of Jesus during that first hospitalization in a way that was like, what's this about? It was like so shocking, and, but so keep in mind, when I got out of that last hospital in 82, and then I quickly stopped the medication. I haven't been on medication for close to 40 years, but of course the doctors were guaranteeing if I went off of my medication, I'd immediately have another psychotic break. But after I got out of that last hospital, it took me maybe till 93. I was in intensive therapy and, connecting with my dreams and studying Jung and doing Buddhist practice and making art and studying shamanism and alchemy and Course in Miracles and anything and everything that I could do to understand what had just happened, because everybody was telling me I was mentally ill, and I knew I was having an awakening. And so then it was in the maybe 94, I realized, oh, I've integrated enough. I'm still a work in process, and I realized something that I think can be real helpful for people. So that's when I began teaching in 94. And since then, I haven't, had to do anything. I haven't had to have a job, thankfully. I've just been able to do that.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Totally. Thanks.
Great. Let's go to Loretta. Loretta, share.
Oh, Paul, thank you very much. And John, I loved it. My initial question is different now. I guess I always, I've been doing this for a lot of years, but when I try to tell other people, sometimes you don't want to say Christ or Jesus or, it kind of, it just puts for me, I mean, my perception is that it puts a slant on things. So this was really interesting in that I never heard this word, first of all, before. And you just said Buddha, Jewish, Jesus. And I'm wondering, was that, question is different. Was that the attraction also, that you could this is kind of universal, no religion attached, no name attached?
Yeah. Well, it was clear to me, you see, so my practice, my formal everyday practice for 40 years is Tibetan Buddhist, but I'm also, I think when you have, sufficient suffering, it opens you up to, I was so open to anything, any teacher or a tradition that would help to alleviate my suffering. And so what I've very much in my own self, in my own process and in my work, I synthesize. I'm very happy to talk about Islam or Kabbalah or Hawaiian Kahuna or Christ or Tibetan Buddhism or shamanism or whatever. And from my point of view, they're all pointing at the same thing. They're all expressions of the same thing. I have no doubt about that. And I get what you were saying. People have an association to, if you say the word Christ or Jesus or whatever, it makes me think. There was one dream I had, at night, night dream. And I was having, this lucidity, and I was going up to my dream characters, telling them that, hey, this is a dream. And somebody said to me, could you not use that word? I kind of have a charge against this, like all this association with dream. Could you use another word? And in the dream, I'm thinking, wow, this is so interesting. Here, I'm trying to share with him he's having a dream, and I'm using the word saying, you're having a dream. And he's like, no, could you use a different word? It's similar to like what you were pointing out. Like people, we all, certain words are loaded, and they have associations and they have a charge. And so for me, I would just, instead of saying Christ or Jesus, if I think somebody is going to react, like if I said that to my mother, who is a good, this Jewish mother, right? She would like completely not hear a word I were to say if I mentioned Christ. So, I might mention, the higher self or, just something that's more neutral.
Can I just say a word in here too? It's like, the Course is very clear. It says this is one form of a universal course. So it's universal. It's interfaith, if you will, in that sense. And, there are no Christians in no heaven. There are no Buddhists in heaven. There are no Hindus in heaven. We're not breaking it down into those kind of earthly definitions. It's something that transcends the whole thing altogether. Right? That's what we're looking at here. Let's not get trapped in denominationalism or even any specific form of man-made structure. Even though it's beautiful in and of themselves, it doesn't make any difference. Our task is to be appreciative of all of it, all of whatever is awakening, right?
Yeah.
Hey, let's go to Dave and see what Dave's got to share with us.
Well, good day, everyone, and thank you, Paul, and thank you, John, for bringing Paul on.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get the feeling that something isn't interesting to me, and I need to not do it or skip it. And that's kind of the feeling I had about this presentation. But I see now a lot, and when that happens, I often think I better do it because there's a resistance in me to not doing it.
Right.
And especially you're talking about manic depression or bipolar. I was diagnosed with bipolar 25 years ago, and mainly it manifests itself as depression and has done so for the last 25 years. So I was wondering if in any of your books, if you have written more about your experience with bipolar or manic depression.
Yeah, for sure.
What hints would you have? I know you can't cover everything in a short statement, but what hints might you have to transcend this condition?
Yeah, for sure. So, I have a book, Awakened by Darkness, and it's a 600-page book that I wrote. It's my personal memoir. And I talk a lot. It's a lot more about the trauma and the abuse and the wounding that I received, and from my father, from psychiatry, once they diagnosed me as bipolar. So I talk, and, I went through an incredible dark night of the soul. And so I talk about it in that book. But keep in mind, it was different for me because as they were diagnosing me with bipolar, I was diagnosing them as being ignorant, because people who know, I don't have, I'm not bipolar, but yet the fact that I was like having this ecstatic experience, and once they drugged me, then I felt depressed. And then they're like, now you're cycling into the depressed part. It was insane, the unbelievable madness of psychiatry. And so for me, I know that when I connect with with the creative spirit, that's why every day, the main focus of my day, I'm really busy. I see clients, I facilitate all these groups, interviews, blah, blah, blah. And every day in the morning, today's an exception because of this, but I creatively write my books. And that's the most healing medicine because, the greatest poison in the human psyche is unexpressed creativity. Okay. And that can feed depression and despair and anxiety. And it's exactly what Christ was saying in the apocryphal text. If you bring forth what's within you, it'll save you. If you don't bring forth what's within you, it'll destroy you. So I would say the real medicine, for depression or bipolar or any sort of suffering is to get in touch with, ourselves as creative beings. We're made in the image of our creator, and our creator is creative. And, so I can go on and on about this, but I wanted to also mention the first part of your question. What I've learned was that, every day, every morning I write, and to me, it's just like making art. It's completely creative because I was trained as a visual artist. It's not any different than when I used to make paintings. And every day I feel right away, as soon as I sit down, this resistance. Oh, I should do something else. Oh, there's nothing there for me. And I've learned the greater the resistance, the greater the breakthrough. Okay. So I've learned not to get hooked by it. And there's an example I have. I remember after I got out of the last hospital in 82, and I found these great Tibetan lamas who were really, just embodying, they're just like, the embodiment of love and compassion, and they're just completely relaxed and at ease, and, and all that. And I would see them as often as I could, like every few days for years. So I was seeing Ken Wapnick on Monday and seeing them on Tuesday. I was just, because I was in such deep, trauma around what happened. And I was just describing to them again and again, the suffering and the trauma and the evil and the demons. And one day they said to me something. They said, Paul, it's the fact that you have such a potential for light that the demons are even interested.
Wow.
And right away I recognized, oh, that's not just true for me. That's the archetypal dynamic. that when we get closer to our light, to our true nature, to who we are, of course it's going to consolate the seemingly darker, demonic, obscuring forces. That happens to me all the time. But for me, instead of interpreting it like, oh, wow, I have a problem, I'm like, oh, wow, this is a sign I'm on the right path. Fantastic. This is the best news I've heard. And just one final little anecdote. A friend of mine, he's doing the audio version of my new book. I didn't want to do it. It's not my thing. So I have this friend who's he's like this, sort of teacher, the spiritual, like a minister, and a super cool guy. So he was doing the audio reading, and he says to me, he goes, Paul, I could not believe what happened. As soon as I began to do the reading of your book, to the microphone for the publisher, these incredible demonic forces came in every day were, trying to stop me. And I began laughing, going, well, imagine what it was like writing the book, but I've just learned that no, of course that's going to happen. That's a sign that I'm on the right path. And I'm really glad that you had the sense of, no, maybe I shouldn't come. I'm not interested in this. But you had the awareness that, oh, wait a second, if there's resistance, that might be a sign that there's something there for me.
Right. I think I shared in one of John's classes about, I'm a Star Trek fan. And in one of the series, there was this phrase, resistance is futile. And so when I feel resistance, I will say to that and kind of laugh, resistance is futile. I know that sooner or later, I'm going to do the course. I'm going to meditate. So why not do it now?
Right. Right. Exactly.
Resistance is futile.
Yeah,
it's like resistance of God. It's my goodness.
Right.
God's going to win.
I think I'm going to try to find your book and read
thank
through
you.
that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. We're getting near the end of our time. Lynn, you want to jump in for a little bit here and share something?
Thank you so much. Paul, John, Mighty Companions. I facilitate a group at NAMI, National National Alliance on Mental Illness. And we celebrate that we're not who we are. We celebrate that we're not who we were told we are. And I remember I was holding on to Khalil Gibran all my life. The quote, "The deeper sorrow carves in you, the more joy you can contain." I was diagnosed with major depression. I was suicidal. My life is totally, thank you, God. I'm part of us. And it's so wonderful my last therapist told me I didn't need therapy anymore. Now, I was in therapy since I was 14. And she validated me. I didn't think what I was going through was real. And she kept validating me. And it took a while, with all the brainwashing. I talk a lot about brainwashing at my group. We've been so brainwashed and so kept down. And we celebrate who we are. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And people like you, Paul, John, all my mighty companions here.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. That's really pretty. I think too, Paul, what this whole thing reminds me of a little bit of my relationship with the church when I was even younger. And I'm going, I think I can really help us to grow here and to expand our consciousness and get into deeper stuff. And they're going, wait, you believe in this thing called A Course in Miracles? You're a heretic. It doesn't work here. We don't need heretics. And so I just took the objective point of view and said, you're right. I mean,
right.
I'll have much better success if I don't try to work within that structure. And of course, that's exactly what's happened.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. So we're very near the end of our time together. Any kind of summarization you'd like to give us? What's coming up for you now, and where you see the whole of us going?
Yeah. No, I'm so inspired just by getting to hang out with everyone. And the idea being, to not get caught in a particular fixed point of view or in a particular tradition. So I'm familiar enough with the Course in Miracles to know it's a wisdom tradition. It's an inspired, this revelatory teaching.
Oh, yeah.
I have no doubt about that.
None.
And, and some people, just like in Tibetan Buddhism, there are some Tibetan Buddhists who just do the formal practice. And when they find out that I'm interested in Course in Miracles or Young or, all these other things, they have a judgment on me going, oh, no, you should just be doing your practice. And so I just want to say it's a beautiful thing to find other wisdom traditions and teachings, that are articulating what the Course is pointing at, maybe in a little bit of a different way, because for me, that helps me. That helps me to connect more dots in my mind and deepen my articulation of what I'm having a realization of. And that's a beautiful thing, that it's not just like that one particular tradition is in possession of the truth, that we, that we all have it in different ways. I mean, that's who we are. We are, the truth in a way. We are, like you were saying, John, the Christ or whatever that symbolizes. And yeah, there's a way of being together where we can step out of the whole sectarianism and dogma and fundamentalism and just actually help each other, to deepen our awakening, that's what this is all about, that we're all on the same side. The expression of that is love and compassion, that if I help you, it helps me because we're not separate. And that, to me, that any one of us can embody that, then we're carrying the medicine for the planet.
All right. That is so good. And it's so exciting. I think everybody here will probably have some agreement about there is this wonderful expansion of consciousness going on, and if we handle it correctly, we're going to be able to have a wonderfully creative future for ourselves that we're going to be able to move into here. And thank God we're waking up. Thank God. We've been asleep long enough. And thank you for all that you've been doing to help the whole planet wake up. And I'm sure you're going to keep doing. So we are at the end of our time. We like to read a passage from the Course in Miracles as a closing. Bud, can you get the Lord's Prayer from the Course on screen for us? All right, good. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Bobby. Bobby, are you willing to sing this for us?
Forgive us our illusions, Father, and help us to accept our true relationship with you, in which there are no illusions and where none can ever enter. Our holiness is yours. What can there be in us that needs forgiveness when yours is perfect? The sleep of forgetfulness is only the unwillingness to remember your forgiveness and your love. Let us not wander into temptation, for temptation of the Son of God is not your will. And let us receive only what you have given, and accept but this into the minds which you created and which you love. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Bobby. Let's go back into our gallery view, and we'll be able to say goodbye to each other that way.